Freezing Bear and her cubs desperately seek shelter. What happens next is unbelievable. The wind howled through the vast, frozen wilderness, sweeping across the endless stretches of snow-covered land like a vengeful spirit. The world was a desolate white abyss, an unforgiving wasteland where life struggled to hold on. Towering trees, stripped of their leaves and life, stood frozen in time, their skeletal branches weighed down by thick layers of ice. The air itself was brutal, each breath a sharp sting against the lungs, as if the very atmosphere was hostile to those who dared to exist in its grasp. It was the kind of winter that left no survivors, a force so ruthless that even the strongest of creatures would kneel before its wrath. But amidst the raging storm, moving through the treacherous terrain, was a mother bear. Her massive paws sank into the deep snow with every step, her once magnificent fur now stiff with frost. She was starving, exhausted, and weak, but she had no choice. She had to keep going. Behind her, barely able to keep up, were her two cubs, their small bodies trembling violently from the cold. Their journey had been long, their strength fading with every passing moment, but there was no time to stop. A blizzard was coming, one that could bury them alive if they didn't find shelter soon. Her body ached from days of endless travel, muscles burning with fatigue, yet her instincts refused to let her surrender. Hunger gnawed at her insides like a relentless parasite, but she had learned to push past the pain. She had not eaten in days, her once powerful frame now reduced to a shadow of what it once was. Every step felt heavier, her limbs sluggish from exhaustion, but she refused to stop. Her cubs depended on her, and no amount of suffering would make her abandon them. She glanced back at her little ones, her heart clenching at the sight. They were struggling, their small paws barely lifted from the ground, their bodies sinking into the thick snow. Their fur, which should have been a warm, protective coat, was damp with frost, their tiny whimpers barely audible over the roaring wind. She could see it in their eyes, the exhaustion, the hunger, the quiet desperation of creatures too young to understand the full gravity of their situation. She nudged them forward with her nose, urging them to keep moving. If they stopped now, even for a moment, the cold would claim them. She had seen it before. How the frozen wilderness could steal the life from even the strongest of beasts. She would not let that happen to her cubs. They were all she had left, and she would fight to her last breath to keep them alive. The smaller cub stumbled, letting out a soft cry as its tiny legs gave out beneath it. It collapsed into the snow, its frail body shaking violently. The mother bear stopped instantly, turning toward her fallen baby. No, not now. Not when they were so close. She leaned down, nudging the cub gently with her nose, but it didn't move. The cold had drained it of its last bit of strength. The larger cub, though just as weak, pressed itself against its sibling, as if trying to lend what little warmth it had left. The mother bear felt her heart twist in agony. She could not carry them both, not in her condition. She barely had the energy to keep herself standing. But leaving one behind was not an option. Taking a deep breath, she lowered herself to the ground, wrapping her massive body around them. The snow continued to fall, blanketing them in its icy embrace, but for a brief moment, she shielded them from the worst of it. The storm howled around them, the wind clawing at her fur, but she held on, waiting for her cubs to regain enough strength to move again. After a moment, the smaller cub let out a weak whimper and shifted slightly. It was still alive. That was all she needed. With a determined huff, she stood once more, nudging both cubs forward. They had to keep going. There was no other choice. The wind grew stronger, the snow swirling around them in blinding flurries. The mother bear could feel it in the air. Something worse was coming. The temperature, already unbearable, dropped even further, and the sky darkened with thick, heavy clouds. A blizzard, a deadly one. If they didn't find shelter soon, they would not survive the night. She lifted her head, scanning the endless white horizon for anything that could offer protection. A cave, a fallen tree, a crevice in the rocks. Anything that could shield them from the impending storm. But there was nothing. Just the unrelenting stretch of snow and ice, a world that seemed determined to swallow them whole. Her breathing grew ragged, her body screaming for rest, but she forced herself forward. She could not afford to be weak. Not now. Not when her baby's lives were on the line. Then, just as hope began to slip away, she saw it. A dark shape in the distance, barely visible through the thick snowfall. A cave. Salvation. With renewed urgency, she pushed forward, her body moving faster than it had in days. The cubs, sensing the change in their mother's pace, struggled to keep up, but they followed. She didn't know what awaited them inside, whether it was safety or another kind of danger. But one thing was certain. She would rather face whatever lay ahead than let the storm take her cubs. They had fought too hard to die now. The Arctic winter was merciless, an unrelenting force of nature that swallowed everything in its path. The mother bear pushed forward, her powerful body weakened by hunger, her thick fur coated in a layer of frost. The blizzard howled through the endless stretch of white, whipping snow into the air, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Behind her, her two cubs stumbled, their tiny paws sinking into the deep snow. Every step was a battle. Their small bodies shivered violently, their breath coming out in weak, misty puffs. They were too young to withstand such brutal conditions, and she knew it. They had to find shelter before the cold drained the last of their fragile strength. But shelter alone would not be enough. Their empty stomachs clawed at them from the inside, each pang of hunger sharper than the last. Without food, even the safest cave would become a tomb. The mother bear had survived countless winters, had endured the cruelest storms, but never had she felt the weight of responsibility as she did now. Her cubs depended on her. Their survival was her purpose, and she would not fail them. Through the blinding snow, she caught a scent, a faint, fleeting trace of water. A frozen river. Her instinct sharpened, pushing past exhaustion. Water meant a possibility of food. Even in the harshest winters, some fish remained trapped beneath the ice, waiting for a desperate predator to break through. Summoning her remaining strength, she trudged toward the scent, her cubs following, their steps unsteady and slow. When they reached the riverbank, the sight before her filled her with both hope and despair. The river stretched before them, frozen solid, its surface smooth and lifeless beneath the heavy snowfall. She sniffed along the ice, searching for even the faintest movement beneath. Nothing. The water below was silent, still, no fish, no signs of life. It was a barren grave of ice. The hunger clawed at her. She had to try. With careful precision, she lifted a massive paw and struck the ice, sending a dull thud echoing through the frozen landscape. The ice remained unbroken. She struck again, harder this time, her claws scraping against the surface. A hairline crack appeared, but it wasn't enough. She needed to break through, needed to find something to sustain her cubs. Desperation urged her forward. Stepping onto the ice, she tested its strength. It groaned under her weight, a warning she could not afford to ignore. But hunger had driven her past the point of hesitation. She took another step, her claws gripping the slick surface, her muscles tensed. The ice was thinner in the center. She could feel it. If she could just reach that spot, she might have a chance to break through. A sudden, sharp sound shattered the silence. A crack. It splintered beneath her, jagged lines spreading like veins across the frozen surface. Her breath hitched. Another step and she could fall through, plunging into the icy depths, sealing her fate and that of her cubs. She hesitated, weighing the risk. But before she could retreat, a terrified yelp made her heart stop. One of her cubs had stepped onto the ice, its small paws sliding helplessly on the slippery surface. In its effort to follow her, it had wandered too close to the fractures. The ground beneath it trembled, and in the blink of an eye, the ice gave way. A jagged hole appeared, revealing the black abyss of freezing water beneath. For a terrifying moment, the cub dangled on the edge, its tiny claws scraping desperately against the ice. The frigid current swirled below, ready to drag it into its merciless grasp. Without thinking, the mother bear lunged, her powerful body ignoring the danger beneath her. She reached out, her massive paw wrapping around the cub's frail body just as its hind legs slipped into the water. The cold was immediate and unforgiving, sinking its teeth into the cub's fur, pulling it down. But the mother bear's grip was unyielding. With a strength born of sheer desperation, she yanked the cub back onto solid ice, her breath ragged, her heart hammering in her chest. The cub whimpered, its soaked fur quickly stiffening in the freezing air. She nuzzled it, trying to warm its shivering body. They could not stay here. The ice was too dangerous, the river of false hope. She had wasted valuable energy for nothing, and now her cub was weaker than before. Every second spent in the open was a risk. They needed shelter, now. Lifting her head, she scanned the vast, desolate landscape. Snow swirled around them, the storm growing fiercer, its icy tendrils creeping into her bones. Then, through the blizzard, she saw it, a dark shadow against the endless white. A cave. It was hidden against the base of a jagged mountain, its entrance barely visible beneath a thick layer of snow. But it was there, and it was their only chance. The wind howled louder, as if urging her forward. She nudged her cubs, urging them to move, despite their exhaustion. Every step was agony, their limbs stiff from the cold, but they had no choice. The cave was their only hope of survival. Yet, as they drew closer, unease prickled at the edges of her instincts. The cave stood in eerie silence, its mouth yawning open like a predator lying in wait. She had lived long enough to know that safety was never guaranteed in the wild. Just as she and her cubs sought shelter, so did others. And not all creatures were willing to share. Her muscles tensed as she approached, sniffing the air for any sign of danger. The cave was deep, dark, too dark to see what lay within. But the storm was closing in, the temperature plummeting. There was no time for hesitation. Whatever lurked inside, she would face it. Because outside, in the ruthless grip of winter, death was already hunting them. The mother bear's weary paws pressed into the deepening snow, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Every muscle in her body ached, her thick fur was crusted with ice, and hunger clawed at her insides like a relentless beast. The blizzard was closing in fast, each gust of wind lashing against her face like a whip. Her cubs, barely able to keep moving, stumbled behind her, their tiny bodies trembling uncontrollably. But then there it was. Shelter. A dark opening in the side of a jagged mountain. A cave. It was small, half buried in snow, but it was enough. The mother bear's tired heart surged with a flicker of hope. They could rest. They could escape the merciless wind, even if just for a while. With one last burst of strength, she trudged forward, her cubs trailing behind. The younger one staggered, nearly collapsing, but she nudged it gently, urging it on. They were so close. Then, a deep, guttural growl echoed from within the cave. She froze, every instinct screaming at her to be ready. The low, rumbling growl was unmistakable. This cave was not empty. Her nose twitched, picking up a thick, musky scent. It was another predator. The darkness inside seemed to move. A shadow shifted, and then another sound. A heavy breath, the unmistakable sound of something massive shifting its weight. The scent became stronger, sharper, and suddenly, she knew. A male bear. Her heart pounded. A lone male bear was the worst possible threat. Males were not only territorial but also aggressive, especially toward cubs. They saw them as competition, threats to their dominance. If she dared to enter, he would attack without hesitation. Her cubs would have no chance. Her muscles coiled with tension as she took a defensive stance, standing between the cave and her young ones. Her claws dug into the snow, her breath coming in hot puffs against the freezing air. But the male did not charge, at least, not yet. The growl was a warning, a claim over the territory. For a brief moment, she hesitated. She had fought before. She had battled for survival countless times. But this was different. She wasn't alone. She had her cubs to protect. If she fought and lost, they would be left defenseless in the storm, easy prey for whatever came next. No, she couldn't take that risk. With a sinking heart, she turned away. Her cubs let out weak, pitiful cries as she nudged them away from the cave. They didn't understand. The promise of warmth and safety was right there, and yet Their mother was leading them back into the storm. The older cub hesitated, glancing toward the dark cave, its small body shivering violently. The younger one, too exhausted to resist, simply followed, its paws dragging in the snow. The mother bear's heart ached as she forced herself to move. She wanted to collapse, to let the snow swallow her, to close her eyes and rest. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not while her cubs were still breathing. The wind howled louder, almost as if mocking her choice. She pressed on, pushing through the blinding white, feeling her strength drain with every step. Then, the blizzard truly began. The world around them turned into chaos. The snow fell in thick, suffocating sheets, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The wind was so strong now that it nearly knocked her off her feet, a force so relentless it felt like an invisible predator trying to tear them apart. The mother bear squinted against the icy assault, her fur offering little protection from the raw, biting cold. The temperature had plummeted further, turning the air itself into something sharp and painful. It felt like the very world was closing in around them. Her cubs were barely moving now. The older one stumbled, falling into the snow, its tiny body too weak to push itself up. She rushed to its side, gently lifting it with her snout, her warmth the only thing keeping it from freezing. The younger one trailed behind, dragging its paws, eyelids heavy. She had to find another shelter. Fast. But where? Everything was a white abyss. Every step felt like walking through an endless, frozen nightmare. Then, the real fear settled in. She could no longer feel her paws. The moment it happened, she barely realized it. 1 second, she was pushing forward, her body moving on sheer willpower alone. The next, her legs buckled. The exhaustion, the hunger, the cold, it all caught up to her at once, like an avalanche crashing down. She collapsed. The snow welcomed her, swallowing her massive frame as she hit the ground. She wanted to get up, to shake it off, but her body refused. She had nothing left. Her cubs let out small, frightened whimpers, nudging at her with their noses. The younger one climbed onto her back, as if trying to rouse her, but she couldn't move. Her breathing slowed. The blizzard screamed around them, burying them deeper in the white void. Was this it? Was this how it ended? No. Somewhere, deep in the fading part of her mind, something stirred. A memory. She had been through worse. She had survived the merciless hunger of past winters, had fought off predators twice her size, had seen the darkest nights and still made it to the light. And she wasn't alone. She forced her eyes open. Her cubs were still there, still waiting, still needing her. If she stopped now, they would never make it. With every ounce of strength left in her, she willed herself up. Her muscles screamed, her vision swam, but she rose. She shook off the snow, nudging her cubs forward. They weren't done yet. Somewhere, out there in the storm, shelter still existed. She just had to find it before it was too late. The mother bear's body trembled as she stood, her legs barely supporting her weight. The storm raged on, each gust of wind cutting through her fur like a blade. Her cubs pressed against her for warmth, their small bodies quivering, their eyes clouded with exhaustion. Every step forward felt impossible, but she pushed on, her instinct screaming at her to keep moving. The snow had piled up so high that each movement was a struggle, as if the earth itself was trying to pull them under. Just as she thought she could go no further, something strange happened. A faint warmth brushed against her fur. Not the biting cold of the wind, but something different, something almost inviting. At first, she thought it was her mind playing tricks on her, a cruel hallucination caused by exhaustion. But no, it was real. The warmth lingered, subtle but unmistakable. She hesitated, sniffing the air. There was something beneath them, something hidden just under the thick blanket of snow. As she shifted her weight, the ground beneath her gave way. It wasn't solid ice as she had thought. It was brittle hollow. The snow cracked, then crumbled, and suddenly, she was sliding downward. Panic surged through her as she scrambled for footing, her cubs tumbling beside her. She braced herself for impact, for another cruel twist of fate. But instead of an icy abyss, they landed on something firm. The snow had hidden an entrance, a passageway leading deep into the earth. The mother bear rose, shaking the frost from her fur. The air down here was different. It wasn't frozen, wasn't filled with the sharp sting of the blizzard. It was warmer. She took a cautious step forward, her powerful paws pressing against smooth rock. The tunnel stretched ahead, winding deeper into the mountainside. The warmth grew stronger with each step. She moved slowly, her ears perked, her senses sharp. Could this be another trap? Another predator's den? But as she ventured further in, her fears began to ease. There was no scent of danger, no lurking threat. Instead, the air was thick with something else, fresh water. At last, the passage opened into a hidden cavern. The sight before her was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls glowed with a faint golden hue, illuminated by the soft light reflecting off the smooth stone. A small underground spring bubbled at the center, its water untouched by the ice above. The ground was soft, covered in a thin layer of moss and dirt instead of the harsh, frozen tundra. It was a sanctuary, a place where the storm couldn't reach them. The cubs, sensing the change, perked up. The older one padded forward hesitantly, sniffing at the air before letting out a small, relieved sound. The younger one, too weak to react before, finally stirred, nudging at its mother's side. They had found it, a safe haven, a place to rest. And then, as if the universe had chosen to grant them one final mercy, she saw it. Scattered near the far end of the cavern were remnants of food, bones stripped clean but still rich with marrow, the faint scent of past meals lingering in the air. Perhaps another animal had once taken refuge here, surviving off whatever it could scavenge before moving on. Whatever the reason, it didn't matter. The mother bear let out a deep, exhausted breath, her body sinking to the ground as her cubs nestled close. She had done it. Against all odds, through the unrelenting storm, the hunger, the exhaustion. She had found them shelter. And not just any shelter. This was more than a cave, more than a mere hiding place. It was warmth. It was survival. It was a miracle. As she closed her eyes, listening to the soft breathing of her cubs, the blizzard roared on above them. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't fear it. They were safe. At least for now. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the mother bear allowed herself to rest. Her massive body, once trembling from exhaustion and cold, now lay still on the soft, moss-covered floor of the cavern. The warmth that radiated from the underground spring seeped into her bones, loosening the stiffness that had settled in from days of relentless travel. Her cubs, nestled close to her, let out soft, rhythmic breaths as they slept, their tiny bodies finally free from the icy grip of the storm outside. She had pushed herself beyond her limits, battling hunger, fatigue, and the unforgiving wilderness for the sake of her young. But now, here in this hidden sanctuary, she could let her guard down, if only for a little while. The mother bear instinctively licked the fur of her weakest cub, her tongue rough yet gentle, ensuring that it was still warm and alive. It stirred slightly, its small, black nose twitching in response, a sign that it was slowly regaining strength. She took in the scent of the cavern once more. There was no trace of fresh danger, no scent of wolves, no lurking predators. They were safe, at least for now. But safety did not mean complacency. Even as she rested, her ears twitched at every faint noise, her mind half awake, ready to defend her cubs should the need arise. Outside, the blizzard still howled, the wind screaming through the mountain peaks like an enraged beast. Snow continued to pile up, burying the landscape in an unrelenting white abyss. If they had been out there, exposed to nature's wrath, they would not have survived the night. But inside the cavern, it was different. The warmth from the geothermal spring created a protective barrier against the merciless cold. The ice that had clung to their fur melted away, leaving behind soft, dry coats that provided much-needed insulation. The ground, though damp in some places, was a far cry from the freezing terrain they had walked across for days. Even the dim light reflecting off the cavern walls seemed to offer a sense of comfort, a contrast to the relentless darkness of the storm outside. This place was more than just shelter. It was a gift, a rare, almost mystical refuge, hidden from the rest of the world. It was as if nature itself had extended a hand of mercy to them, rewarding their determination to survive. The mother bear had faced what seemed like insurmountable odds. She had fought against hunger, the bitter cold, and exhaustion, pushing forward when any other creature might have given up. But she had not. She had relied on instinct, on resilience, on the unbreakable bond she shared with her cubs. This journey had tested her in every way, forcing her to make impossible choices. She had turned away from a cave that could have provided safety, knowing it was already claimed by a stronger predator. She had nearly lost one of her cubs to the treacherous ice, saving it at the last possible moment. She had collapsed under the weight of her own exhaustion, only to find a hidden path that led them to salvation. It was as if fate had guided her steps all along. Every hardship, every setback had led them here, to this sanctuary where they could finally breathe. Her survival, and that of her cubs, was not just a matter of luck. It was proof of the unwavering strength that lay within her. Days passed, and the blizzard eventually began to weaken. The howling winds softened, the relentless snowfall lightened. Slowly, the world outside the cavern began to shift. The sun, hidden behind thick clouds for so long, began to peek through the sky, its light glistening against the frozen landscape. The worst of the winter had passed, and though the air was still cold, the signs of spring's approach were undeniable. The mother bear knew it was time. They could not stay in this cavern forever. This refuge had given them rest, warmth, and strength, but the real world was still waiting. Her cubs, once weak and barely able to walk, had regained their energy. Their once hollow eyes now sparkled with renewed life, their tiny paws steady as they moved around the cavern, playfully nudging each other. They were ready. With a deep breath, she rose to her feet, her powerful muscles once again filled with strength. She nudged her cubs forward, guiding them toward the entrance of the cave. As they stepped outside, the crisp morning air greeted them, cool but no longer merciless. The landscape that had once been a deadly wasteland of ice and snow now glowed under the rising sun, the first hints of spring beginning to emerge beneath the frozen ground. The journey was not over. There would be more challenges ahead, more hardships to endure, more lessons to learn. But for now, they had conquered the worst of winter. The mother bear looked at her cubs, who stood beside her, stronger than before. They had survived, and together, they would face whatever lay ahead. This incredible story of survival reminds us of the unbreakable bond between a mother and her young, the power of resilience, and nature's unpredictable yet awe-inspiring ways. If this tale moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in the mother bear's place? And don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories of survival, courage, and the wonders of the wild. Your support helps us bring more heartwarming and inspiring content to you.